Alright, so let's talk about piecewise functions. A piecewise function is a function that is split into multiple pieces. When we talk about piecewise functions, we have to talk about its domain and range as something a little bit different than normal. So its domain is the complete set of all x values on which at least one piece exists. So, for example, if we look at this piecewise function here, you can see piece 1 is right here and piece 2 is up here. So we're looking for all the x values on which at least one of these pieces exists. So for the first one, we have an arrow here, which means we're starting at negative infinity. Our domain is starting at negative infinity. And it's going to stop here at positive 2. So for our first piece, our domain is going to stop at positive 2. Now to write this in interval notation, we go from least to greatest. And so because it goes all the way to negative infinity, we're going to start there. And then it's going to go to positive 2. Now note there's an open circle here, right? Because there's an open circle at positive 2. So when we write 2, we are not going to put a bracket afterwards. We're going to put a parenthesis because we can't include the value 2 itself because there's an open circle here, but we can include everything up to it. So this is how we find the domain of the first piece. Now the second piece is going to start at positive 4, and it's going to go all the way right. We're looking at this piece up here. It starts at positive 4, which is at this point right here, which is a closed circle, and it's going to go all the way right because there's an arrow on the second piece. So that's going to go from positive 4 to infinity. We can't include infinity ever, but we can include positive 4 in this case because that is a closed circle. So when we write the domain, we want to write it as the complete set. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the interval of our first piece, the domain of our first piece, and union it with the domain of the second piece. And now we have a complete set of every x value on which at least one of these pieces exists. Alright, looking at the example on the right, we have 3 pieces this time. Now I'm going to do pieces 1 and 3 first. Again, I like to refer to these pieces in left to right order, so this is the first one, the second one, and the third one. So for our first piece here, it's going to stop at negative 3, but it keeps going all the way left. And if we write that in interval notation, it's going to be negative infinity to negative 3 with a parenthesis. I'm going to write that in pen here just so that it shows up better. And for our third piece, again, we're skipping the second piece for now. The domain starts at positive 4, and then it goes all the way right. Again, we're looking at this piece down here, where its domain starts at positive 4, and then it goes all the way right. Alright? And to write that in interval notation, it is once again from 4 to positive infinity, where we include the value 4. Now we're not done, because there is one more x value in our domain, and that is right here, at this particular x value, which is at the x value of 0. So our domain is everything from negative infinity to negative 3, not including negative 3, 0, and everything from 4 to positive infinity, including 4. So that's how we're going to write our domain. It's going to be negative infinity to negative 3, union 0, union 4 to infinity, including 4. Now, if you want to be fancy, you can write that 0 in two ways. You can either write it just as a 0, or you can write it with brackets around it, just a square bracket around that. It means the same thing, so you can write it like this. This is fine for showing understanding of this. You might see this, though. You might see this on a test, because we're looking at interval notation. And so you might see this, and this is just a fancy way to write the same thing. Okay, let's talk about range. Its range is the complete set. Again, this is about piecewise functions, which are functions that are split into multiple pieces. Its range is the complete set of all y values on which at least one piece exists somewhere. So let's go down here, and I'm going to use a different color this time because we're looking at range. For our first piece, it's going to start here. Oh, wait, no. It would have started there if we were looking at domain. Instead, it's going to start here because we're looking at range. We are looking at range, so we're going to be looking at values on the y. We're going to be looking at y values, which are on the y-axis. So, we're going to start here, and it's going all the way down. So going from least to greatest, that's going to be from negative infinity, which we can't include, up to -2, which we could include if it were a closed circle, but because it's an open circle, we don't include it either. And that's the range of my first piece here. Now my second piece is all the way up here. It starts at +4 and is shaded up. And we can include +4 because there's a closed circle here, and then it goes to positive infinity. And so now to write our complete range, again, ignore this, that's a mistake. To write our complete range, we're going to union both of these intervals. So we've got negative infinity to -2, union from 4 to infinity, including 4. Alright, feel free to work ahead of me on this one. And at any time you can pause the video if you want to jump ahead and then use my video to check. Alright, so our first piece is going to go from, it's this one down here. We're going from bottom to top because we're dealing with range. So our first piece is going to go from -4 all the way down. So that's from negative infinity to -4. And we do include -4 because there's a closed circle there. The next one is going to go from -1 right here to 0 because we're looking at the range of our second piece. And again, if I said domain for any part of this, I mean range. So that's my bad. We're looking at the range of the second piece, so that's from -1 to 0. -1 is included because there's a closed circle, but 0 is not. Alright, and now for our last range, we just have one little point here, which is at the y value of +3. So our range, our full range, is going to be from negative infinity to -4, including -4. And then it's going to continue to -1 through 0. That was a bad way to phrase that. So we've got our first interval from negative infinity to -4, and then it breaks, and then we've got our interval from -1 to 0. That's a much better way to phrase that. And then we union it with 3. And again, you could write it like this, or you could write the 3 with brackets around it. Either way will work. Either way will work. Alright, I want you to work on the sample problems on the back. I will have a second video which will have the sample problems already done, the top 3, and it will explain the bottom 3.